Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. You will hear from industry leaders covering innovative, cutting-edge business, learning, and HR topics that weave current market research and technology into each episode. Our Excellence at Work podcast is hosted by Brandon Hall Group's Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, and I'm Rachel Cook, the CEO of Brandon Hall Group. Welcome to our Excellence at Work podcast. Today with me, I have joining Dr. Jill Stefaniak, the Chief Learning Officer at Litmos. Hi, Jill, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm excited for our chat today. I want to share a little bit about your background and what at Litmos, and I also want to recognize Litmos for winning 10 Brandon Hall Group Excellence Awards in 2023. 2 of them are from Human Capital Management and 8 of them are from Excellence in Tech Awards. Congratulations, that's exciting. And also you are a Diamonds Conference sponsor at Brandon Hall Group's HCM Excellence, scheduled February 12th through the 15th. And we're excited that you're going to be joining, and you're going to be speaking in a session on the first day. So establishing L&D as a strategic investment to maximize your ROI. All very important topics. ROI is so crucial, especially in today's world of technology and how fast it's evolving, and where, especially with AI, we can't have a conversation without AI nowadays. I remember when we were just talking about ChatGPT last year at our conference, and it was people wondering, what is that? Or it was probably just a month or 2 out where we started to kind of hear about ChatGPT. So it's interesting kind of where we are today. And from your experience, you are as I mentioned, Dr. Jill Stefaniak is the Chief Learning Officer at Litmos and Associate Professor at University of Georgia. Her interests focused on the professional development of L&D professionals and instructional design making. She also serves as an Associate Professor in the Learning Design and Technology program at the University of Georgia. This content represents the opinions of Jill Stefaniak, and it carries no endorsement of the University of Georgia. Welcome. And just a little bit about Litmos. Litmos develops learning solutions for top performing companies, an established leader in the market since 2007. Litmos offers the world's easiest to use LMS, comprehensive learning content libraries, integrations with top workflow tools and services to support success. Thousands of companies trust the solutions to create, curate, and connect learning content to employees, customers, and partners. The solutions are used by more than 20 million people in 150 countries across 35 languages. And as I mentioned, Litmos has been a great partner of ours, very supportive of our conferences and our awards program, and we enjoy working with them. And I'm looking forward again to hearing more from Jill about personalized learning for teams, departments, and organizations. And from your perspective, what is personalized learning?
I think of personalized learning as being a more long-term commitment to our employees and to our overall organizational success. And so what I mean by that is, when we're as L&D professionals, I look at it as cultivating and developing these learning experiences that are really going to meet our employees, to meet our learners where they're at when they need it most. And so that may mean trying to identify training opportunities for them that are relevant to their current roles within the organization, but also looking to the future and looking at what are we anticipating for them in the future within those roles and for their own career development within our organizations long term.
And how can instructional designers build training that meets the needs of learners?
I think it's looking at what is it that we want to do? Thinking about the end in mind. Too often, I hear the term learning styles is getting mixed in when we talk about personalized learning. It's asking our learners, what's your learning style? The researcher in me always cringes a little bit because I don't prescribe to learning styles. I think learning styles is a myth. And I think it's really looking at what is it that our learners actually need. And so it's looking at what's the meaning of that learning experience. What is it that we want them to be able to accomplish and to achieve? And when we do that, it's really looking at what are the ways we can scaffold instruction into meaningful chunks to kind of establish some type of a learning path, a learning journey for our employees, figuring out what is it that they need to know. Is this a long-term learning experience? Is it something where it's, immediate task completion due to safety requirements that we need them to be able to complete a task very quickly? But when we look at ways we can design that, it's really taking into consideration what are those unique training needs of the learners, what are the unique training needs of our organization, and what needs to be happening at that time.
And in our research, we've seen companies using assessments I would say about 25% reported that they have some type of built-in assessment, and in that that it is a priority for them, as well as about 7% are actually have them integrated. And we see the importance of having assessments as you are, building your learning programs, or even as part of the actual learning itself, to get them engaged and to be able to personalize it based on their needs, their interest. And so we see an increased, even though this number is not as high as we'd like it, but if you ask companies, how they feel around the assessments, they report a very high percentage of the importance of them. I think it's just more about having the means or the resources to invest in assessments and the right types of assessments, because it is a huge market and there's so much out there. And from your understanding, what are some of the strategies that and practices that learning professionals can use to evaluate and measure learning impact at the individual, department, and the organizational level?
Absolutely. So I think of I see needs assessment and evaluation going hand in hand. I don't think you can have one without the other. You can't do one successfully without keeping the other in mind. When we look at a lot of instructional design processes, a very popular instructional design process is referred to as ADDIE, which is an analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And when we look at that, analysis and evaluation are typically looked at as the bookends of that instructional experience that we're designing, and they should be considered. But I also think it should be looked at, it's so much bigger than that particular instructional experience that you're designing at that moment. So looking at needs assessment, one of the challenges that I think in my research, looking at how organizations do needs assessment, or challenges that other L&D professionals have advocating for needs assessment, is finding the time and the resources to do it. Oftentimes there's such a push to jump right into designing and developing training. So ways I think that we can do that is through scaling those needs assessment efforts. If for L&D professionals, if you don't think of it just as it's something we do at the beginning, if you think about it that it's something that we're continuously revisiting, whether it's we're having those development and design conversations with our teams, if we're going through beta testing and piloting training materials with particular audiences, it's constantly going back to and asking ourselves, are we addressing the needs that we initially intended to address? Because like any project, we experience scope creep, or there may be something new we have to add, or someone's asked for another technology or another format to deliver that content. And sometimes when those adjustments get made in that design and development process, things can get lost in translation. So I just think it's always really helpful to have those needs kind of at the forefront. If we think about keeping our learners as the center of everything that we do, really asking ourselves, am I contributing to, organizational efficiency and effectiveness? Am I contributing to ease of learning for my employees that are going to be taking time away from their jobs to complete this training? How is this going to help in the long run? And so some ways doing that is, I think I always recommend when I'm talking to L&D professionals, if you could only ask 5 questions, at the beginning of a kickoff project, what would they be? And to really think about that. And it's hard to limit it to 5 questions, but what would be the most 5 important questions you could ask related to the needs associated with that project? And then I also think if we think about evaluation, we think about the back end of everything. Why are we having our learners go through training? What's the purpose of training? How are we going to know if we've been successful? How are we going to evaluate that? I think a lot of times when we look at L&D training materials, there's knowledge checks that are embedded within those learning modules that will give learners and our HR professionals immediate feedback as to how that employee participated or engaged with that module. But if we were to think about it long term and go, if we were really looking at what's the return on investment with the training that we're putting forward, what is that? What are those metrics look like 6 months from now or a year from now, especially when we're trying to enact change or improvements within our organization? That's not going to happen immediately after someone's completed a training module. Completing those training modules or those training experiences is a part of that. So really thinking about keeping the end in mind. How are we going to evaluate the success of this over the next couple of months or over this next year, so we can continuously look to make improvements within our organization? And so when we look at needs assessment and evaluation as those bookends, really thinking about how do they tie together. The needs assessment should be identifying those opportunities for improvement or for enhancing employee performance within our organizations. And while we're identifying that should be driving the initial design of instruction. And then we should also then be looking at how are we going to evaluate that? And so the evaluation piece in those metrics should be looking at how successful were we at mitigating or minimizing or hopefully eliminating whatever that gap in performance was that we identified through needs assessment. And so I think it's treating it as an iterative process when we're designing instruction, constantly asking ourselves, does our instruction align with the evaluation metrics or those strategies we're trying to implement? If we're saying that we want our learners to be able to perform a particular task upon completion of training, have we integrated opportunities for them to learn those processes, to practice those processes and demonstrate them and receive appropriate feedback along the way? And so it's really looking at alignment and how does all that come together within our organizations.
And you pointed out asking, 5 questions, what you want out of the learning. And I think that also when you kind of break it down, because some of these projects can be huge and massive and transformative, but you can't do it all at once. So if you can kind of break it out into chunks or whatever your strategy is, it can be more manageable. And then thinking about, the feedback that you are receiving from certain aspects of the program, what does that mean for that instance versus for the entire program? And, how do they engage with the learning, and how do they, what kind of impact, and how are you collecting that data? And the more that you can build that in the very beginning, as you mentioned, the better off you are. It doesn't mean that you can't make changes, but to start at the end or to go backwards is very hard, because then you may not have the capability. So you may not have the momentum even to gather that data, as, if it's not as real time or relevant, or, post the learning for a timeline that the learners may not even remember what they went through. So having the ability to think about it all throughout from the beginning and making it fluid and continuous is critical. What are some of the when employees have more and more time or critical demands, what are some ways of training can be developed to fit their workday rather than another thing to do? And again, this is more kind of personalized, but how can we, or from what you've seen, how can this be more available to our learners, to our employees?
Absolutely. So I think we're starting to see, or we have been seeing, a shift in integrating training into the work experience. If we look back in probably the last decade, it was more common. You would see employees would take days off and they would attend trainings and then come back. And we're starting to see a shift where, while those events still may be occurring when necessary, we're also starting to see how immediate training, just-in-time training, is being integrated into the actual role. And so ways we can do that is providing opportunities that allow for just-in-time training to our employees. So it's anticipating our employees' needs. And so thinking about, and this is where it's really important, I think, for L&D professionals to be working with different supervisors within their organizations, working with their HR teams and talent development, and looking at what are some of those tasks that employees may have to complete. They're not necessarily a regular part of their routine, but when they're going to have to complete it, they're going to need resources immediately. And so it's anticipating what some of those challenging times may be, or some of those infrequent tasks within their roles, and then trying to identify what types of training and resources are needed. That could be a learning module. It could be a demonstration video. It could be a job aid where they're an infographic, just reminding them of certain steps if it's related to data entry, but really thinking about what those formats are, so that if I'm an employee and I'm going through my daily tasks and I stumble across something and I haven't done it in a while, I know where I can go to get the resources I need, so that I'm not having to, halt my performance for that day, find my supervisor and say, I need you to send me off for training. It's trying to provide some of those immediate responses. And so within just-in-time training, we can't anticipate every single issue that's going to come up within an organization, but it's really focusing on what are the necessities associated with that training and with those particular tasks that we may be looking at. It's looking at ways we can reduce cognitive load to support our employees' abilities to engage in problem solving. And so sometimes certain tasks are very complex and complicated, and that's just the nature of the task that we can't always control for. But what we can control for as L&D professionals is the presentation of those training materials. And so that may mean presenting things in a particular format that makes the most sense because of that task. It may mean breaking things down into meaningful chunks along the way. And so I think trying to integrate those things is really helpful. But I also think from a long-term standpoint, we want our employees to be able to embrace just-in-time training and to value that. And that we can't just expect our employees to do that. I think it's really important that organizations are promoting a culture of continuous learning. And in an ideal world, we'll have instructional, congruence, which is where, our employees are sharing the same attitudes with our organizational leadership, that training is valued, training is important, and it's just a part of the daily routine. And so it's constantly sending out that messaging as well, and having supervisors value training and allow for opportunities for employees to engage in training when needed to support not only the organization's goals, but also their professional goals as well.
Would you say, you mentioned about, reducing the cognitive load for learners for some of the concepts or some of the more challenging. What would you say, though, would be the hardest part in doing this? Or what are some of the challenges that you see companies facing when developing learning material for, just in time?
Absolutely. I think the hardest thing when I'm talking to L&D professionals, it's trying to meet the needs of every learner. A lot of L&D professionals want all of their learners to go through a training experience and see the value in it, and appreciate and appreciate the design behind it, and say, yes, this is of use to me. And that can be really hard, especially when There are times where L&D professionals are developing shelf courses where you're never going to know who your learning audience is, because of you're never going to know who those customers are. It's still a challenge too, even if you are familiar with the employees within your organization and you're familiar with those learners. To be able to meet the individual needs and preferences of everyone can be a challenging task. And so ways that we can kind of work around that is to focus in on the necessities related to the tasks at hand, but then also providing opportunities to promote reflection and goal setting. So maybe it's providing opportunities for employees and learners when they're going through training to stop and pause for a moment. What are the challenges associated with their jobs? Reminding them about how this is related to a particular task at hand. I think it's good to have sometimes disclaimers. I always call them relevancy disclaimers in our trainings, reminding employees this will help you do this. This will be of use to you if you are in this type of role within your organization. I think that can help them start looking at ways in which they can value and perceive utility in what's being presented to them, but also allowing that time for them to reflect so that it doesn't have to be 100% identical to what they're currently doing, but giving them that time to then process what adjustments might they need to make. Maybe it's encouraging them to pause and talk to a supervisor along the way. But I think those are ways we can kind of work around that. It doesn't solve all of the problems, but I think it does. It is a way too to also, again, kind of going back to our earlier question about personalized learning. Personalized learning, I think it helps empower those employees to take some ownership in that learning experience as well.
Absolutely. And as we are headed into 2024, how does that look like for Litmos? Any personal resolutions? Anything inspiring that you could share with our community?
Absolutely. So with Litmos, we're continuously looking at ways we can improve and continue to provide total innovative solutions to our clients. So we're constantly looking at ways we can improve our course development tool. And so we're looking at ways we can enhance accessibility and we can reach a wider audience. We're looking at ways we can leverage AI technologies in a meaningful way that helps support the design of instruction, but also helps support that personalization that accompanies learning. And so we're really excited to be able to showcase some of those new features coming up in the new year.
That's great. That's exciting. And I look forward to seeing you in February in Palm Beach at our Brennan Hall Group HCM Excellence Conference. And can't wait to listen in on your session on establishing L&D as strategic investment to maximize your ROI. So it'll be great to have you and your team, and we're very excited. And thank you, everyone, for signing in to us and listening to us. Wishing you all a very happy new year and healthy and prosperous year ahead.